Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's town hall at the National Constitution Center. I'm Jenny Parker, and I am the new VP of Communications, and I'm just thrilled to be here. I'm also the mom of Owen, aged 10, and Eden, aged 8. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Ronnie Polaneczky and Anne-Marie Slaughter to discuss Slaughter's highly anticipated book, Unfinished Business: Women, Men, Work, and Family. Thank you very much to Lynn Yackel and the rest of the team at Vision 2020 for their partnership and support of this event. Thanks are also due to Elevate Philadelphia and our co-host, the Philadelphia Media Network. First, some housekeeping notes. Please take a moment now to turn off or silence your cell phones. Also, we will be doing questions and answers at the end of the program. Please write your questions down on the note cards provided, and our staff will collect them. Ronnie will get to as many of them as she can. There will not be a book signing tonight, but we do have signed books available for sale in the museum store. Also, I want to alert you to some very exciting town hall programs we have coming up. On November 2nd, we are hosting a very important debate about school choice. And on November 12th, John Meacham will be here to preview his new biography, The American Odyssey of George H.W. Bush. Finally, please note the National Constitution Center is a nonpartisan, private, nonprofit organization, and we rely on the support of our members to engage people of all ages in constitutional education. If you are not a member, please see Rebecca Bolden or visit constitutioncenter.org/membership for more information. Now, on to tonight's program. In 2012, Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote an article for The Atlantic called "Why Women Still Can't Have It All." It immediately lit up social networks, including mine, and sparked a national debate. Joining Anne-Marie Slaughter tonight is Ronnie Polaneczky, an award-winning columnist with the Philadelphia Daily News and a nationally published magazine writer and who writes commentary and stories covering all aspects of the human experience, from politics to criminal justice, public education, medicine, the arts, and family and civic issues. She's a popular public speaker. Ronnie is also the 2015 Eugene C. Pulliam Fellow of the Society of Professional Journalists. Ronnie lives right here in Philadelphia with her husband, and they are proud parents of a daughter who is now a college sophomore. So she knows a little something of tonight's topic, the challenge of balancing career and parenthood. Anne-Marie Slaughter is the president and CEO of New America, and the Bert G. Kerstetter 66 University Emerita, Professor Emerita of Politics and International Affairs at Princeton University, and the former dean of Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Politics and International Affairs. In 2009, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appointed Slaughter Director of Policy Planning for the U.S. State Department, making Slaughter the first woman to hold that job. A foreign policy analyst, legal and international relations scholar, public commentator, Slaughter was previously a professor at the University of Chicago Law School, Harvard Law School, and president of the American Society of International Law. She joins us tonight in her role of author of the newly published and critically acclaimed book, Unfinished Business: Women, Men, Work, Family. I've read it. I can't recommend it highly enough. Please join me in welcoming Anne-Marie Slaughter and Ronnie Polaneczky.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I've been so excited for this night to come. I just finished Anne-Marie Slaughter's book. It's wonderful. I highly recommend it. And the issues that took her three years to create the book after the article are so worth the wait. So welcome. Thanks for being here, and I really look forward to a good hour. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think we should just hop into it. There's so much in here. So let's start with the word juggle, which you talk about. You dislike the word juggle, as in juggling work and home. You also say that the United States is one of the only industrialized countries that does not require paid sick leave, time off during the week on vacation days, time off during the week or vacation days. You say, so maybe the problem isn't that women are deficient jugglers, maybe work is the issue itself. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Right there, yes. Yeah. I don't like juggle because jugglers, you drop balls. You can't drop your children. You can't, I mean, the sort of metaphor doesn't really work, I think. And I don't particularly like balance either, because balance is a luxury. Those of us who can talk about balance, we are the women at the top who have those choices. For most American women, it's equality. It's equality as a necessity. They don't have the choices. You immediately got to the heart of how I see this issue, which is it's not a women's issue. It is a work issue. It is the issue of a 21st century workforce, which over my lifetime, as obviously more and more women have gone to work, 60% of us, 62% of American women work. That number's actually going down. We can talk about why. But still, 70% of mothers are in the workforce. So the workforce there are men and women who have to earn an income and who also have to take care of their children and their parents and their spouses and disabled members of their family, anyone who needs care. And the workplace is stuck somewhere between 1950 and 1970. I mean, I say it's as if people still expect June Cleaver to be at home at 3 o'clock when kids go home from school. And for most American families, that's just not true. So I see this as a problem of an inflexible 20th century workplace, not adapting to both the people who work and the ways that we can and should be working in the 21st century.
Right. And you said, too, that calling them women's issues is a coded way to appear progressive while still leaving the issues squarely in like a feminine camp, which I interpreted as you meaning that, so they're still relegated to women have to fix it.
Yes.
And you talk about half-truths, and so that family policies are aimed at women.
Exactly.
And can you tell us a little bit about when you say different people applying for the exact same job, a male and a female, and what happens when it comes to family policies and how they're discussed?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things there.
There's a lot there.
There is, but that's exactly right. That when we call these women's issues, or when we say they're work and family issues, that's just code for women's issues. We are still saying these are not work issues. We are still saying it is up to women to raise children, and it is up to women, if they want to work, to figure out how to work and raise their families, as opposed to saying this is a workforce issue. Women are doing better than men in high school and college and graduate school, and they're starting out wonderfully, and they've got all this talent and education and experience, and we are losing a disproportionate number of women and a growing number of men because we're not making room for care. And one of the things that's interesting in the research on this is even in firms where an equal number of men leave, the firm doesn't see it as we're losing people because of the way we work. The firm focuses on the women and still says it's a women's issue. So just to start with, we really do have to see it as a workforce issue, as a caregiver's issue, and as we'll talk about, very much as a men's issue. And now I've forgotten the last part of the question.
I think I forgot what I asked you, but I think you did well. You talk a lot about having a new language for these things, and so that instead of calling anything even a family issue or a women's issue, we should call them a care issue. And you talk about how we are called to be both caregivers and also to be competitors, to go out into work. So if you could talk a little bit about how changing the language could impact this issue?
So I should start by just saying, I was a professor for many years. I was a law professor. Law is language, right? How we frame something makes an enormous difference. But I also write in the book that I'm old enough that I remember when we moved from Miss and Mrs. to Ms., which at the time, I grew up in the South. We always said Ms., but we could say Mrs. and Ms. for Miss. But it made a huge difference. Lots of people poked fun at it. But actually, when you had Miss and Mrs. for a woman, but only Mr. for a man, it said, well, what's important about a woman is whether she's married or not. And you didn't need to know that about a man. So I believe in language. And here, our language, in so many ways, still reinforces this notion that earning a living, breadwinning, is a man's job and can be a woman's job, but raising a family or caring for your own parents, that's a woman's job. And so we talk about working mothers, but we don't say working fathers, because we assume fathers work. And we don't, if we said it every time we talked about a man who had kids, he's a working father, you'd be pointing to the fact that he's responsible for caring for his kids as much as he is providing for them, just like you say working mother. I recommend not talking about stay-at-home moms or dads, because that assumes that the office is the default place we're all supposed to be, and if you need, if you're at home, you need an adjective to describe it. I think we should abolish talking about men helping, right? I would like to just get rid of that, we get into all sorts of issues of female sexism here, but the idea, he helps, my husband helps, well, that means you're in charge. Right? That means you're making the lists. That means he's doing what you want him to do, or not, as the case may be. But it is not saying he is equally responsible for this task, any more than, imagine if you were in the office and it was, oh yes, Anne Marie, she's a young associate, she helped. No. We need to change our frame, as I said, so that men and women are equally responsible for caring for each other and for earning an income. And in any given couple, that balance may be, tipped a particular way, but our society assumes that responsibility devolves on all of us.
Right. And so, but one of the problems too is that care still is not valued the way that we value work. So talk a little bit about that, about how we need to revalue care, I think. Not devalue.
This is the single biggest change in my thinking over the past 3 years. Because 3 years ago, when I wrote that article in The Atlantic, if you had asked me about my mother, I'd have been very quick to tell you that my mother was a professional artist, and I would have told you how great her paintings were and how many people had bought them, and I am enormously proud of my mother's art, and our house looks like the Museum of Mom's Art, but fortunately she's sold, she's a very accomplished artist. I would not have told you that she was a homemaker for the first 20 years of her marriage. I would not ever have it's not that I would have denied it, I just wouldn't have thought it was something to praise and to value. And now I look at both my parents and I see two people in their 80s. Dad was a lawyer, is a lawyer, he's still working, and my mother's an artist. But they also raised what I think is a pretty fabulous family. And I look at the fact that my mother's work made it possible for me to do any of the things I've done. Without her work, investing in us and teaching us and creating a family that supports each other, and we're not perfect. We have the same fights and ups and downs as any family does. But I think, at the end of her life, she can look back on that and think, that was incredible work and valuable work. Just like my father can say, I represented a lot of people as a lawyer, and that was important work, but they're equal. And we do not think that as a society. Any woman, any man can tell you the minute you can't answer the question, what do you do, which is the first question Americans always ask each other, with an answer that says, I do this job and I imply I've reached this level and I make this much money, you're just not important. And so valuing care is saying, hang on, whether it's teaching or coaching or directly supervising, disciplining, role modeling, all the things that go into care, that's really important stuff. We may not pay for it. We should pay more for it than we do now, but we should value it.
Why don't we?
Why don't we value it?
Why don't we value it?
It's a really good question. I think in some ways we valued it more in the 50s and before, in the sense that, there were lots of patronizing ways, but there was the idea that behind any successful man, there was a great woman, right? And men said that, and they understood that, and they valued their wives for it. I don't want to go back to that world, don't get me wrong, but I think in the process of liberating women, you wanted to do the powerful thing. You had to. So I was raised to think being a lawyer was great. That's what my father was. I was also raised to think I don't want to be what my mother was. That's what we're escaping. And now I think women have gotten to the point where we can say, if we'd run the world from the beginning, we'd have valued caring for others. We do value caring for others. And I think plenty of men do. I really do. I think this is a particular moment in our history as a result of a lot of different dynamics, but doesn't have to be. And I would say, when we were, since I'm sitting here in the Constitution Center, the era this wonderful place celebrates was also an era of barn raisings and quilting bees and pioneer communities that cared for each other. There are plenty of care stories woven into America's history. It's just a question of what we pull out.
So if we're to value care more, then people would need to feel more comfortable using workplace flex policies to care for their loved ones. But you say that there's still a stigma against using them. So even employers who are trying to be progressive and they have these policies, their policies are still underused.
Yes, and that was the question you asked me. I didn't answer, but it fits perfectly here.
Okay.
I write in the book about one of my former students who describes interviewing at a major law firm and getting, first of all, of course, the women partners. She'd see the women partners, and then the women and the men would talk to her about the firm's great family policies. But her husband was interviewing at the same law firms. They met in law school, and he never got told about their family policies. So right there, you got a problem, right? The firm is assuming all the women associates will need to take care of children, but the male associates will not. Excuse me, why? It takes two to create them still and for the foreseeable future. But equally, if you get told what great flexibility policies your employer has, your next question has to be, and how many senior managers or leaders have taken advantage of these policies? And unless the answer is multiple, they're not serious. What they mean is you can do this, but you will not make managing partner. You will not be on the leadership track because you're not sufficiently committed to your career. And if you're a man who tries to do that, your whole manhood will be brought into question. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is flexibility is hugely important. And indeed my husband and I were able to make this work because we had plenty of flexibility. But if you're stigmatized for taking advantage of the flexibility, that's just a whole nother problem. Because then again, yes, you may be able to work, but you're not going to be able to rise.
And it occurs to me that if we're talking about language, we talk about those policies as being on the mommy track,
yes,
which just sort of ghettoizes them. And,
absolutely.
And it must be terrible to be a man who says, I guess I'm on the mommy track
yes,
now.
Yes, yeah. Like Mr. Mom, like all the ways we denigrate men who are, as I put it, or my husband calls it, lead parents.
Yeah. You talk about women become invisible as soon as they leave to care for their children. Who are they invisible to? Because if they leave, aren't they also then perhaps joining a whole community of women who also have left? So maybe they've become more visible to people who have not seen them before?
That's a complicated question. So what I say, and I cite lots of people who say this, and I've never had this experience directly, but I've certainly seen it. I cite a woman who was a prosecutor, and she stops working and to be full-time at home, and she says, just overnight, she becomes nobody, because when people ask her what she does, she can't say, I'm a prosecutor. She says, I'm home with my children. So she's invisible to the arbiters of value and prestige in this society, which I do think still are more those of us who are professionally engaged. Mm-hmm. Is she a member of a community of Caregivers, yes. And is there, do we value that in the abstract? Yes, although even there, if you're in the PTA or you're a teacher, if you're earning money for caregiving professions, you're still not valued as much as if you're in a really competitive profession. So I would say she may well be part of a community, although the men who do this are not, and they feel much more isolated. But it's still, the way I would like to look at it, I look at my brother and sister-in-law. They're both lawyers. My sister-in-law is working part-time. They have 4 children in 4 different schools. I'd like to say they're both working father and working mother. As a working mother, she's taking time out to invest in her children, an incredibly important social activity without which this country will not flourish. And she is still a lawyer, and when she is ready, she will go back to being the fabulous lawyer she is, and I expect her to burn up the track. Mm-hmm. That's the way we ought to think about it, right? Which is, this is an incredibly important activity that people do, or if she said she's taking care of her parents. Mm-hmm. And I was born in 1958. I'm not thinking about this immediately, but as I get older, I think a lot about, you want your children to be able to be there for you too.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is time to talk about the men's movement, which you have proposed in your book that we need a men's movement. Tell us about that.
So there are 2 ways I said that this book really is very different than the article, because I spent 3 years talking to people and reading what people wrote me and having conversations with audiences like this one. And the second biggest change is how I think about men. And I have to say, it started because men wrote to me, and I did not expect that. And 20% probably of what the letters I got were from men, but they were very passionate, and they said, "You think I have it all, because you think this is a role I want. But from my point of view, I would much rather have more time with my children." And indeed, my own father said that he changed how he was working in his 40s because he realized he was never going to know his children. But men who said, "I want to be there, I want to have the same relationship with my children that my wife does, but I can't do this. And when I try to do this, again, my whole masculinity is impugned." And so what I argue is, it's obvious logically, women can't be equal to men unless men are equal to women, unless we change gender roles in both directions. But for that, men need to assert their desires, that they are as socialized into being the breadwinner as women used to be socialized into being the caregiver. The women of my mother's generation, many of the women of my generation, this was your role. You were the caregiver. And men have been socialized into you are the breadwinner. I look at my sons and I say, yes, you have to have a way of supporting yourself. Everybody should have a way of supporting themselves. But I say, if you want to be lead parent, or full co-parent, absolutely. That is a wonderful thing. You've watched it with your father, and it is a great thing, and I will welcome that if you choose that, and I guarantee you'll be able to support a woman with care who then is perhaps the bigger breadwinner. Mm-hmm. But that, we need male voices there. My husband's just written about it. Men are writing us about it. Madison Avenue seems to understand it's out there. It's advertising a Civic for soccer dads and says, "This car has room for you, your children, and your self-respect." There are, millennial men's attitudes are changing, but I think we're going to have to really focus on what men want and how we give them the same ability to care for their families as women.
What do you think women will have to give up for that to happen? And I know my husband is here tonight, honey, but we would have an argument where he would say, "You want me to do more, but you've got to let me do it my way." And I would think, but I know the better way. And can I tell you how hard it was and sometimes still is? I don't even know where he is.
He's taking notes.
Oh, there he is. Hi, honey. So that really struck me, that not just that men have to look at each other, not like look at the sissy with the baby in front of him, but women have to also give. happen? How do you see that happening? What are the conversations that have to happen?
Well, when you said, what do women have to give up? Control, right?
Oh.
That's what we have to give up. And there's a whole, I hope that women will read this book and hand it to their husbands. But I guarantee you, if you do that, your husband will hand one chapter back to you, heavily underlined. And it's the chapter called Let It Go. It's the chapter that says, with my husband and me, when I thought the same thing. I thought, I got this. This is the house. I know how to do this. Never mind, I was the least domestic young woman there ever was, right? I refused to learn to sew, iron, cook, any of it, because I didn't want to be asked to do it. And my husband can iron a shirt and put a meal on the table far faster and better than I can. But what I said, my husband said, I'm happy to be the lead parent, but I'm doing it my way. Right? You're not going to micromanage me to do this. And, in the book I say, imagine if you're a woman that you walk into your office and your boss says to you, I think I'm biologically better at this, but you can probably do it if I micromanage you enough. If I write long lists, and if I'm traveling, I call you every 2 hours to make sure you've done them. I would sue him. Right? No way do I believe that. And yet we do treat our husbands, many of us, that way. And in our house, we don't anymore. But it's not like I agree with the way he does it. Right. That's to your point. I don't agree with the way he does it. Right. I just have become convinced that I do not have a line to God on how to raise kids. That I think I know how to raise kids because my mother raised me, and I think she did a great job. But Andy makes decisions about discipline and how to invest time, and that I may disagree with them, but when I think about them, I can't say they're wrong. Right. I just want to do it a different way, and he's been a great dad.
Right.
But it's hard.
And so some of those, some of the notions that you've had to give up on, some of them obviously have to do with care of your sons, but when I speak with women, some of them too say they still feel burdened by the housework, by sort of the administrative function of this corporation called us. And so where would you see that what kind of conversations could begin to shift that? Because oftentimes I think for women who are involved in care, for them it also means they're also doing cooking, and they're also doing the stuff that is actually drudgery that I think people wouldn't necessarily fight to get to do.
So this is one, look, nobody is, when you're doing the cleaning, yes, I get that. Again, in the first place, it's not like men can't run households. The expression running a tight ship comes from the Navy. Right? It is not as if men can't do this. Of course they can do this. When it is their responsibility to do it, they do it. They do it in the military. They do it in countless various societies. Of course they can do it. Do they do it the way women do it? Maybe not. Some men I know actually, my brother is far more insistent on everything being in the right place than my sister-in-law is. I really do think that there's personalities here. I do think there's a set of expectations that women apply to themselves. And partly I say, well, if you really want it to be a certain way and he doesn't, then okay, then you have to do it, but don't get upset that he doesn't help you because you're the one who's imposing this standard. And beyond that, I think this is a question of my house is much more cluttered than I'd like it to be by a mile. None of you can come to my house. But I also look at this and I say, look, my husband and I both have work we love. We are raising our children. We are investing time in family and as few friends as we can, but those people are closest to us. And there will be time to clean up later. Right. Our children will not always be here, and that's just not what is most important. Although I'd love to wave a wand and have it be all right. It's okay. Right. What's most important is being cared for, is taking care of the most important things.
Right, agreed. You're right, you said part of me still questioned the value of being a stay-at-home mom right up until the set of experiences that led you to writing the Atlantic article. And that made me wonder, is it necessary for the decision makers and the policy makers in this country to have a personal experience with some of the issues that you experienced? Because, you know, you're a very bright, very accomplished woman, and you still had your ideas about women who stayed home until your life started to go into that direction. And so is it necessary for more people in a policy decision-making capacity to also have personal experiences, or is there a failure of imagination maybe among some of our policymakers?
Well, I think part of that is true. I mean, look, it's hard to put yourself completely in somebody else's shoes. That's why we believe in diversity. And should we be electing more women? Absolutely. Should we be electing more dads who've had direct care, you know, who've been at home with their kids? Absolutely. And, you know, Paul Ryan and I probably disagree on lots of things, but I tip my hat to him when he said one of the reasons he didn't want to be speaker was he wanted to be with his kids. And I don't think that was a euphemism. I don't think it was an excuse. I think it was real. And so just to point out that it isn't just women, that we need to elect people who understand the importance and the difficulty of working and caring for others. And many of those people will be women. I also do think, again, though, that this is a moment in the women's movement. I mean, this book is called Unfinished Business, in part because, as my sister-in-law said, if you are a working caregiver, your life is unfinished business. So, I mean, you just never finish anything wholly. But it's also the unfinished business of the women's movement. And there, I think, again, there was a reason why we devalued the work that our mothers did. It was, you know, if Gloria Steinem were sitting where you were, I would not say, gee, you did this wrong. You should have been, you know, saying that homemaking was every bit as important from the beginning. That's not realistic. You know, we did what we had to do. But what I am saying is now we're at a point where women and men together can say, okay, time for a course correction, time to understand that investing in others, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about investing in others is just as important as investing in ourselves. And I will say the other thing that changed my mind was looking at the neuroscience on what happens with children in the first 5 years of their lives. We are not just teaching them things. We are shaping their brains. We are determining what they will learn for the rest of their lives. Honestly, knowing that now, I wish I had spent more time with my children in the first 5 years because, you know, the people who are doing that, the mothers, the lead parent mothers and fathers, they are creating their children's futures. And I'm not sure I know more important work than that from a policy-making point of view, not just from a personal point of view.
Right. You talk about how, excuse me, that caring calls upon different qualities that are excellent complementary qualities to, say, leadership or workplace qualities. Knowledge of others, patience,
humility.
Hope, humility. And I think that those are qualities maybe of a really good parent, but if not all parents have those, is it a leap to say that all caring in a sense is equal, meaning everyone who's doing caregiving will hone those skills, so let's bring them back in? If parenting is much more subjective?
So it's a very good question. And the piece of the book that I just completely did not expect is that somebody sent me a tiny little book written by a philosopher in 1971, a man who wrote it before the term work-life balance was invented, and it was called On Caring. And it is a philosopher essentially analyzing what happens when you invest in others and what happens when you grow yourself, not because of your success, but because of your child's success, or giving your parent his or her best day, right? Again, it's different when we care for elders than children, but there's a lot the same. And I don't want to say, gee, everybody who gives care automatically develops all these things. I do think the core, though, is very important, which is, he says, you know, when you care for somebody, you have to invest in them. You have to teach them and support them and discipline them and encourage them. But critically, you also have to stand back. And that's the hardest thing as a mother often. I mean, you know, you want to pick up your child when they're learning to walk. They have to learn to fall. You have to let your teenager drive off in your car, which is much harder, at least it was for me. And that sort of back and forth, that investing but also learning to let others make their own mistakes, I do think that's something that translates into the workplace. That's what good management is, but also into all sorts of great, life activities, whether it's volunteering or, and being involved in your community. So I think I would say caregiving unlocks a fundamental dimension of our nature and hones it in a way that so does competition. If you're competitive at all, it hones a different set of attributes.
Right, so you had compared caring and competing as giving and winning.
Yeah.
Which I thought was terrific. And they both speak to probably two really strong urges that we all have.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that there are progressive workplaces that have really terrific policies, and then there's a lot of companies that don't. So would you like to see more mandated policies to level the playing field so that people who are trying to do the right thing aren't sort of competitively competing too hard against other companies that can pocket the difference?
I would. I mean, I think we can go quite a ways through transparency. And I'm on the board of an organization called openwork.org, and the website has lots of examples of companies, all different kinds of companies, construction companies, teleworking companies, all sorts of things in between, who are reinventing the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I think, allowing individual employees to say, well, yes, okay, so we're an accounting firm, but this accounting firm over here manages to do it, or, we are in sales, but this other company does it, that'll help. But I do think in the end that this is something we have to do as voters. Again, I can't imagine a better place to communicate this message, but I decided in the end that, we one woman at a time, one CEO at a time. In the end, government has to say, these are the standards, like paid leave, right? Some companies offer paid leave, but they will get undercut by the companies that don't, unless you say, this is what we have to do. And again, as a government, we want our children cared for, we want our elders cared for, we want sick and disabled people cared for. So there's a real reason to say, these are the minimums. We want maternity and paternity leave. And we want them both because, mothers and fathers both create children, raise children, and we want access to affordable daycare and elder care. There are many different ways to compete within that market once you've made it, but I do think government has to make it. It's probably going to be bottom up as much as top down. It's happening in cities. I don't know what Philadelphia's policy is. I know Cincinnati just offered paid leave 2 weeks ago, and Washington, D.C. is about to. And states. New Jersey has 6 weeks of paid family leave, and we do that through a payroll tax. And then probably ultimately federal mandate. But I think government has to play that role.
Okay. Let me get back to the reason why you left your job in D.C. You talked about how your older son was becoming well acquainted with the local police department, and so you needed to get home. If he had not been running into trouble, do you think you would have stayed in D.C.? And also, how does he feel about being mentioned, even not by name, but in the book?
Well, the second question is easier. He's fine. I mean, he approved everything in the article and in the book. I never would have written that article if he was already on the right track, because I would have been doing other things as I was, and my husband. It's not like my coming home magically fixed things. It didn't, but the both of us worked. So he was fine, and he's fine now, and I do try to keep his actual name out of this. And he's in college, and we're thrilled about that. That's a really hard question. If he had been doing fine, would I have stayed? I'm just not sure how to answer it, because the person I was when I went to Washington would have stayed, because this was my chance. And you just don't know. I always say that the first time I was eligible for a government job, I was getting tenure. The second time, I had a 2-month-old. In 2000 and 2004, my party didn't win, so I might have. On the other hand, after I came home and both kids were doing fine, I didn't put my hat back in 2012 because I looked at them and thought, I just can't miss these last 4 years. And, you know, one of my children's in college already, and I already think, oh my gosh, you know, that time is gone. So I don't, the person I am now would not have, but the person I was, I don't know what that person in the middle, that hypothetical person, would have done.
Yeah. So once your nest is empty, would you think about returning to DC?
Well, one of the things I write about for all caregivers, but we are still majority women, is what I call about phase 3. Right? So phase 3 is when your kids are out of the house and you can go hard. And I talk about careers as in terms of intervals and going hard and slowing down. And there, you know, if Hillary wins, she'll be 70. I love that. I mean, not just because she's a woman and she might be the first woman president, but the fact that she ran for Senate and was Secretary of State and ran for president twice after her daughter went to college. So I think there's a huge talent pool out there of women and of men who are, when they're ready to go. And I would say I'm totally happy where I am now, but I would not rule out foreign policy in my phase 3.
Right, okay. Well, we're going to get to some audience questions. There's some really good ones here. And this is one that we spoke about earlier. How will legalization of same-sex marriage change roles and responsibilities, or will not?
Oh, thank you.
Or will it? Sorry.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the book, I talk about friends of mine, 2 wonderful psychiatrists who are married, and you know they have to divide up who's going to be the principal breadwinner and who's going to be the principal caregiver, or how they're going to do it, just like everybody else does. But they're 2 women, and I've got plenty of male friends who are in same-sex marriages, and they're 2 men. And when they have to think about this question, they don't have the default role the way we do. They don't have that immediate sort of, well, I'm the woman, so I'm the primary caregiver, and I'm the man, so I'm the primary breadwinner. They ask questions like who's making more money, and who is more ambitious, and who has the more flexible career, and who has the better boss, right? And who wants to be home more. And those are the questions I think we should all be asking. So I really think same-sex couples in many ways are showing the way for the rest of us.
Wow, because it's unshackled care from gender.
Right. Now, I have many gay friends who tell me that doesn't make it easy, right? I mean, I'm not saying, oh, gee, it's still, these are hard choices, but it does show us that you can make these decisions independent of gender.
Okay. How does what you say about caregiving and other issues apply to poor women who are living in minimum wage, who have minimum wage jobs?
This is, again, why I think we need to focus on care, because if we just focus on advancing women, we inevitably look at the top. The fastest way to look at how much progress women are making is how many women are in the Fortune 500, because there are 500, and you can count, and there ought to be 250, and there's 29. And so if you focus on care, you look much more at, yes, the women at the top who are discriminated against if they take time out for care, but more importantly, the 40 million women who are either in poverty or on the brink, the 40% of women who are the primary breadwinners in their family, the majority minimum wage workers who are women, the 2/3 of shift workers who are women, and the poorest members of our society, the very bottom, who are overwhelmingly single mothers. So thinking about why aren't we supporting care opens the lens, I think, to see all women, and the policies you then need will actually help poor women much more than wealthy women, because wealthy women can buy their way out of a lot of these problems, but poor women, without paid family leave, they lose their job if a child is sick, or their pay is docked, or they certainly can't actually get promoted. So I knew I was writing from a privileged position 3 years ago. I still am, but I've spent 3 years thinking about how do we frame this and think about it and promote it so that we're looking at all women.
Do you think if the minimum wage were raised a lot higher than it is right now, that would at least open some more options for people to finance care for
Well,
their families?
only if the care market is very changed, right? Daycare costs more than rent in all 50 states. And Gail Collins had a great piece in the Times this weekend looking at dividing up the country into 600 plus, care units and the tremendous cost of care. So even if we raise minimum wage, that is not going to allow poor women to put their children in quality care. And again, as a society, given what we know about those first 5 years, if we want to save on incarceration costs and education costs and employment costs and all the things we do to try to meet those social challenges once those kids have grown up, we should be investing that in really high quality care. And this is, there are studies that show what happens when you do that and just how much we save.
That's a good lead-in for this question. Is there a relationship or connection between the lack of respect for the nurturing work of stay-at-home parents and our refusal to allocate adequate resources to educating our children?
Yes, I think so. I think very much so. And again, I think this idea about care is, we think about the physical stuff. We think, it's bathing and dressing and driving and feeding, and all of that is just the scaffolding for the real work of care, which is talking, endless talking, stimulating, questioning, disciplining, guiding. That's the work that you do when they're little. You're shaping their brains. When they're teenagers, you're doing everything you can to get them to make the right choices. And if we understand care that way, we think of it, I say in the book, that we pay caregivers the same amount that we pay people who mix our drinks, who park our cars, and walk our dogs. These are our children and parents we're talking about. And I think once you understand what that care does for the children, and again, for parents, it's about, as I said, letting older people have maximum autonomy and supporting them where they need it, but not taking over their lives, then we can understand there's a market here. In fact, there's a whole care economy here that investing in teachers and early educators and caregivers for elders is something that we will get back the investment we put. But I do think we need to think hard about what care means, and it's not the physical stuff.
Okay, this again sort of leads into that. It's all working tonight. Okay, how would you how would you design an approach to education, specifically post-secondary education, that would start to incorporate ideas of equality and caring in the workplace?
That's great.
Yeah, great question.
It is a great question. Well, partly we've done that. Millennial attitudes, as you've probably all read, are very different on this score. Last week, Bain put out a study that showed 50% of male MBAs expect to put non-work commitments ahead of career at some point in their careers. That's a big change. And that's consistent across the board with millennial men. And that's because many of them were raised by working moms, right? By working parents generally. So we are changing ideas just by the way we've changed who's raising kids and how. But I do think you could design a curriculum that would, in the first place, teach people much more about childhood development. I honestly, as a parent, I wish, when you think about the various mandatory courses I had to take, like Rocks for Jocks, and if there are any geologists in the audience, I apologize, but that was my science distribution, knowing something about how a brain develops in the first 5 years of life, I would certainly want to know more about that. I would want to give people more experiences of caring, which we do in volunteers, but also in terms of mentoring, right? There are various ways. As I said, this is a whole side of who we are, and the anthropologists all tell you we would never have survived as a human race if we didn't, care for each other. So I think there are lots of ways you could build in the idea that this is important. But most important, I'd educate people to understand that their careers are going to be long, that they're going to be learning their whole lifetimes because college is being reinvented, and that there are going to be these periods where, yes, they're going to invest more in multiple careers, and these periods where they're going to have more time to care for those members of a family they create.
Okay. School is on everybody's mind, so here's another one. Have you given any thought to changes in the school schedule to help working parents?
Oh, God.
School ends often at 3 p.m. and then events, sports games, etc. occur right after. It's very difficult to pick up or attend a game at 3 p.m. if both parents work full-time.
Yes, and I think in the Atlantic article I wrote, in caps what my assistant sent to me, and my assistant she's a fantastically well-educated woman who also has twins, and she wrote, the single most important thing you could do for working parents is to make school schedules mesh up with work schedules. Yes, but where do I start on the insanity of a school schedule that is keyed to 19th century agricultural system, right? I wonder, are we going to be in the 23rd century and we're still going to be assuming that we're all going out to do the harvest in the summer? So there, I think, absolutely, we're going to change this. But partly, I think, again, we are going to redesign education pretty fundamentally. And we're doing that in many ways already, K through 12, but we're just beginning to plug into the full range of digital opportunities. And it is going to be absolutely possible to design learning parts of the day, and we'll still have schools in various ways that fit with work schedules, just as it's possible to design work schedules. There's no law that says you have to be there till 5. You can come home at 3, or let's say 4, and do whatever you need to do, and then go back online, or get up earlier and do your productive work, often I would do it from 6 to noon. I happen to be maximally productive from 6 to noon and not that great after that. So if we wanted to, we absolutely could do this. I think technology and what we know about education is pushing us in the right direction too.
Okay. You may have addressed this earlier, but I want to get the question in just in case there's lingering questions. A gentleman writes, I am a married gay male with our children. With the focus of your writing on people with children, should I feel excluded from your views? Please comment.
So what was the beginning part?
I'm a married gay male with children.
With children.
With children.
But then,
with the focus in your writing on people with children, should I feel excluded from your views?
I think it might be saying he's without children. I don't want to.
Without children.
Without
Is it without children? Without children? Okay.
Yes, and I'm very glad you asked the question.
Children. I'm so sorry.
That's
okay,
right.
Good.
I'm very glad you asked the question because. Absolutely not. In the first place, as you can hear, I really do think that caring for parents is as much a part of what all of us are going to face at some point as children. But here's what I would say more broadly. In the book, I talk care. It can mean investing in yourselves. It can mean investing in your community. It is investing in others. And one thing, frankly, I think that same-sex couples have brought to us, families are constructed in so many different ways. I have former students who I count as part of my family. They're people I've mentored. They, come on vacations with us. These are people I love and who are connected to me in a deep way. So, this issue has traditionally we see it through children. Traditionally, we see it through mothers. So step 1, mothers and fathers. Step 2, children and parents and spouses and disabled members of families. Step 3, let's broaden what we mean by family. Let's include the community. Let's include people you invest time in. And really in the book, that goes all the way to investing in artistic creation, but I won't go through that whole argument now, but absolutely not. Absolutely. This argument applies to all human beings because it is part of what makes us human, that we invest in others, that we love others, and at the end of our lives, almost without exception, we look back and we say, the most important thing in my life was my family, however we construct that. Thank you.
How do women advance in the workplace when they are pegged as being in their baby-making age? For example, how do companies look past the gender issue? Second part, in order for both people in the relationship to succeed and advance, does it become how much you make to afford luxuries like hiring people?
So the last part of that question.
I may need someone to explain it past the handwriting again. Why don't we go with the first part?
Okay, so
first part. How do women advance in the workplace
the
when they're
baby
pegged
making,
as
yeah.
being the baby? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that should be addressed in a?
Well, there's a very simple way, which is that if every single man asked about family policies, it would change that, right? So if you made a pact with your mate, your partner, your sons, whoever, and you just said, if you want to have a family, and roughly the same number of men and women do, and sadly, there's a study at the Wharton School that shows, 40% of Wharton graduates of the class of 1992, women and men, are now planning not to have children. That's a bad thing. But if every single guy just said, so tell me about your paternity leave policy. Tell me about your flexible policy. I'm expecting to have kids, and I just wonder how I'm going to be able to manage that. Just as a professor, my last year at Princeton, I started asking all my male students, had they thought about how they were going to fit together their careers and their family? A question I'd asked women forever. But it dawned on me, this is crazy. I need to be asking men. So that's the simplest way to change this, that it's not the women who the baby-making machine. It is two people who have a child. Yes, she carries that child. Yes, she bears it and breastfeeds it. But honestly, there's nothing a mother can do that a father can't do other than actually bear the child. Because a man can feed a child bottled breast milk just as well as a woman can.
Okay.
To get a little graphic.
You have covered changing roles between males and females. How are the children faring with the fathers becoming lead parents? Are there any statistics?
Okay, and I'm going to take that question and talk about what I think underlies it in part. So at least I don't think we have statistics. I can certainly say I rarely give a talk that somebody doesn't come up to me and tell me that he or she was raised by their father and how wonderful that was and how they thought that was normal. So anecdotally, and there are lots of single fathers out there, and there are plenty of fathers who, for whatever reasons, ended up raising their children. So the idea that, kids raised by fathers are going to turn out any differently than kids raised by mothers, we don't think it's odd that a boy is raised by a mother. Any more than,
Interesting.
Think about it, so we each have children who are our gender or the opposite. Why on earth does it make any difference? We do have research that shows fathers who are deeply engaged in raising their children are very good for daughters, that we do have that data. Here's the deeper question, though, which I thought I heard. The elephant in the room here is the question of masculinity, right? It is the question for men of, can I do this and will it be okay? Will it be okay for my children, but will it be okay for me? How will I be seen? And equally for women, right? So brave guys have raised their hands and said, okay, this sounds super, but let's face it, the dominant guy gets the girl. So I see heads nodding here. Okay. So, yeah, there's no question that, we've been raised, the guy who's the biggest provider has been seen as the most attractive. Well, we know from all sorts of animal and human studies, women are very choosy in their mates. And yes, we bear the children. We want someone who is going to be a good father. And a good father has meant bringing home a big paycheck. But my point is, I knew I could bring home a big paycheck. I also knew I wanted a strong, ambitious man. But I knew I needed a man who could support me with care more than cash. Because I'm happy to bring home the cash. I'm more driven than he is, and I needed somebody. I didn't know how much I needed it, but I always knew I needed a co-parent. And to the extent women look at men and say, that's a really strong, secure guy who's got the guts to actually break gender roles and say, I'm perfectly happy to be the lead parent, guys will respond to that. But I absolutely think that this is the same kind of cultural change that we have to take on that we took on with respect to women when I was growing up. Because when I was growing up, a woman who was competitive was told she'd never get a husband. Well, she could be competitive, she just couldn't show it. And God forbid if she beat a guy. But I got 2 husbands. And we now look at, women like Serena Davis or Monet Davis or lots of women CEOs who are feminine but powerful, and we no longer think they're not feminine. And that's great, because it means a woman can be what she wants to be. So I think we can do this with men too, and I think there are lots of military men who are doing this, and they're great role models. But I do think we got to grasp this nettle, because unless we do, we can talk all we want, but the guy's going to say, sure, you say you want that, you don't. And women are going to say, well, we want guys who are equal parents, but then actually not live their convictions. So this is a conversation, I think, it's uncomfortable, but we've got to have it, and we've got to let men be as fully men as we have let women be fully women.
Okay. In raising our children, should we not separate boys' and girls' toys and clothes like Target recently said they would stop doing? Can we encourage equality between sexes if we continue to support two separate but equal cultures? Interesting question.
Yeah. We tried to keep guns away from our boys, toy guns, and they used swords instead. They essentially used, all traditional boy toys. I basically think I think they should be mixed. And I don't like blue and pink, and I'm perfectly happy to have everything be, any boy, any girl wants to play with things. But I'm not standing up here arguing there are no gender differences. That's just crazy. I live with 3 men. There are gender differences. I grew up with 2 brothers. When girls get together and boys get together, it's different conversations. So this is not a claim that says we can live in some unisex world. And I don't want to live in a unisex world. I love being a woman. I don't want to be a guy. People are every single place possible on that spectrum. So I would say let's make it possible for little girls and little boys to play with whatever they want to, but let's not try to deny hormonal differences, physical differences. That's part of what makes life fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This is one, I just have to read it because I feel so bad for this woman. For the woman who she's writing about, someone says, my stepdaughter, an architect, mother of 3 children, wife, and healthcare executive, had to cancel coming tonight because her boss informed her at 3 p.m. that she had to work tonight because an important client had to have, quote, answers on a project by the morning. And so she's at the office. So shout out to her. Has the work environment gotten worse, better, or stayed the same since I was trying to manage a career, marriage, and raising 3 children in the 1970s?
It's gotten worse. I think there's no question. We work more. We know that. We know that statistically. We work more, and actually white-collar workers, work even more because there's no overtime, there's no limit to what you can ask people to do, and of course we do now have technology that means we're on call all the time. That technology also allowed me to do work from home a lot of the time, so I love it, but it does mean that it is now up to us to set a new set of norms about what reasonable work is. And so, I do think when you're in a client-facing job, that's where it's hardest. But even then, it is possible to push back against clients, right? Some of the work that, again, I cite this in the book, that these Harvard Business School professors have done, have said, there's a culture of over-promising and over-delivering. We'll get you that 100-slide deck by 8 tomorrow morning, and half the time the client doesn't look at it until 2 or 3 days later, or at least the end of the day. And so even there, I think it's this sort of expectation that it's 24/7, and that's what it means to be good. I think we can push back against. So first point, it's gotten much worse. Second, what do we do about it? In New America, we've basically started the norm that says we don't send much email on weekends. And if we do, we send something that says you don't have to answer it. I'm sending this now because I will forget if I don't. Because I used to save all my emails and then forget to send them Monday morning. So I do send them periodically. But the norm is that, after work, on weekends, you'd only do it if you have to. Let's put it that way. But the other point is just we have the research on productivity, right? Working less, not infinitely, like somebody who works 6 hours is going to get more done and more productively than somebody who works 2. After that, not so clear, right? I mean, I think 6 really intense hours, you can get a ton done. 8 hours, you can get a good amount done. Then it's a question of diminishing returns. And so I really do believe, I require people to take 4 weeks off at New America. You get 6 weeks of paid time off, but only 2 of those can you roll over. Because people, we're thinkers. We're thinkers and writers and analysts, and we will do a better job at what we do if people take time off. That's just, there are countless studies about that, about being productive, being creative, being innovative. You need rest, you need downtime, you need stimulation. So the way I think we're going to push back against this is to fight back against the idea that working most means working best. It's just, there's plenty of evidence that it's not true.
Well, that is a terrific note to end tonight's discussion. Thank you so much. We could go on for hours.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
It's a good note.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you would like